All right, my friends, welcome back to Anti-War Radio, Chaos 92.7 FM in Austin, Texas. I'm your host, Scott Horton, and welcoming back to the show my good friend Anthony Gregory. He's researched something or other at the Independent Institute. He writes for LouRockwell.com and StrikeTheRoot.com and a great many other libertarian publications in print and online. Welcome back to the show, Anthony.
Hey, Scott. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Oh, it's good to have you here. And listen, I got to tell you, I'm really disappointed in the Democratic Party after reading Seymour Hersh's new article in the New Yorker magazine verifying what Andrew Coburn wrote in Counterpunch a couple of weeks back about the Democrats giving hundreds of millions, turns out $400 million, to George Bush in order to support al-Qaeda-like terrorist groups in Pakistan. Anthony, what's the matter with them?
Well, no matter how low our expectations of the Democrats sink, we can still be disappointed, right?
It sure seems that way.
Yeah, and that's what it seems to me, because I know I've not been a fan of Democrats. I've never voted for a Democrat ever. And in the 90s, I certainly didn't like the Democrats much. But as you pointed out on your show last week, the Republicans have been so monstrous that it's been easy to think that the Democrats were the default lesser of evil. But what's becoming increasingly clear as we're approaching November, even this default lesser of two evils status seems illusory, doesn't it? Because it's not just that they aren't doing everything that you and I would like them to do, which is to get out of the way and to totally dismantle the police state, but the Democrats have been capitalizing off of just how bad the Republicans have been on civil liberties and on foreign policy, and mainstream America has kind of sensed that the Republicans have taken things too far. But even with that, political support, there would be public support for more resistance. The Democrats aren't doing anything to curb even the most insane excesses in the imperial presidency and the warfare state and the police state.
Well, and they won the election in 2006. Despite expectations, they took every single election that they were running. Not a Democrat lost. And they took control of both the House and the Senate. And they did so basically by default. It was kind of a running joke all summer 2006 that, wow, the Democrats aren't even really running as anything except not Republicans. They're hoping to win by default. And people apparently hated the Republicans so much that worked. And yet they took that anti-war, anti-Bush administration mandate, and they've done jack squat with it.
No, you're right. In fact, it wasn't very long until after they took the reins of Congress that they began giving Bush all the war spending he wanted and more, so long as Bush would do things like support minimum wage or whatever. Justin Raimondo points out on AntiwarRadio.com a week or 2 weeks ago, the welfare warfare state, and he points out that the Democrats don't even demand that much. What they demand for domestic socialism is pretty minor compared to the huge warfare state that they're willing to support. And I think that what this means is that it's not really a compromise at all. They want the surveillance state and the police state. And I pointed this out in an op-ed for the Independent Institute right after they won in 2006. I said, are they going to save our civil liberties? Well, no, they've always trashed our civil liberties. And when they're in power, they like to believe, the grassroots left likes to believe, well, once they get in power, they can do some good. And now they're saying, well, we have to wait till they get the presidency, and then they can do some good. But that just makes, they're less likely to do good when they're in power. And Obama's been saying this in particular about the surveillance stuff. He used to say that he opposed it, especially telecom amnesty, and I know you've had the great Glenn Greenwald on to talk about this. And now he says, trust me, when I'm the president, I'll monitor this to make sure that it's not abusive. But the whole idea is it's the executive that's supposed to be monitored when he's surveilling us. That's the whole point of judicial review of surveillance. It's not just so a different president can monitor himself.
Well, what does he know about that? He only taught constitutional law at the university there.
Yeah, he probably has less of an excuse, doesn't he, than, say, Bush, who, sure, he's the president, but what do presidents know about the Constitution?
Yeah. And it is the same, whether it's the surveillance or the war. They talk a good game, or at least a reasonable sounding sort of, leaning toward reasonable sounding argument. And yet, when it comes down to it, they just continue to roll over for the president. And, the excuse is, well, we're afraid that we'll look weak. And yet, what looks weaker than that? I mean, you look at the poll numbers, they show that not only do people disapprove of Congress even more than they disapprove of the president, they disapprove of Congress because they keep rolling over for the president. It's when they stand up to him that people start to give them a little bit of credit.
Right. And you remember in the 90s, people were saying this about the Republicans, people who came from a more conservative kind of pro-freedom orientation. They thought that the Republican Congress was giving Clinton much of what he wanted, most of what he wanted, but once they had the presidency, it'd be fine. And, of course, we saw that wasn't the truth at all. And now the idea is if they keep rolling over, they can win, but it can't be just because they don't want to look weak. It's because they actually want the government to have these powers. When they had the Patriot Act in the Senate, all but one voted for it, all the Democrats. And then later they try to blame that, just like they blame the war on Bush. But in both cases, they renew the police powers, they renew the war spending, and their excuses change. 4 years ago, the Democrats said, well, we have to keep voting for war money because we need to support the troops, and there's elections, we can't just pull out. They just keep this going, and the scam keeps going, and people are sick of Iraq. But now, as you pointed out, the war is on the brink of being widened significantly, and it's already been covertly widened a little bit into Iran, and it's quite frightening that there's not more of a stand. And, of course, Obama doesn't take a stand on Iran either.
Right, yeah. The only stand he takes there is that they're the greatest threat to peace on earth, and all options remain on the table.
Exactly.
There's an article in McClatchy newspapers today that Glenn Greenwald pointed to. It's called, "Is Obama Turning Out to Be Just Another Politician?" And this goes to that question of, well, what's weak? Refusing to go along with the Bush administration, or going along with them on things that are supposed to make you look tough, like violating the Bill of Rights from beginning to end. And it turns out, in practice, Anthony, that compromising toward a tough war party policy hurts Obama. And it makes the people who believed in him, whatever problem they had, I hope they're over it now, look at him now and say, well, wait a minute, I thought you were our guy. Now all of a sudden you're just, as wishy-washy as John Kerry up there. All you want is power and you'll say anything to get it? Well, who wants to support that?
Well, bringing up Kerry is a good point, because I recall in 2004, I'm not sure if this was a decisive thing, but it was a very close election. I remember thinking, why is Kerry flip-flopping and trying to run as a war hero when, if he ran, the best he did in actually inspiring anybody, especially in the middle, and disaffected conservatives and liberals, was when he attacked Bush's war policy. The closest he came was in that debate, I think, where he said, you made the big mistake invading Iraq. We just shouldn't have done that. And that's what people like. But it seemed a little disorienting how much he would back away from that and say we need to be even harder in Fallujah and we need to be harder in Afghanistan, which all the Democrats, Obama's for that now, widening that war in Afghanistan or expanding it. And it occurred to me, the reason that these people don't want to run on a more anti-war platform is because they don't believe in it. And they don't want that. Why would they work to dismantle a police state and empire, or even significantly curb their power, when they stand to inherit this power?
Right. It reminds me of that article that Lou Rockwell wrote a long time ago about trying to decide which was more dangerous, the Republicans or the Democrats, and how the Republicans really are the party of the corporatists. They're really not the party of the state. They're the party of the corporations, and they want to get in there and use the government to just completely rape us and everybody else on earth for 4 or 8 years if they can get away with that. And then they turn it back over to the Democrats, and the Democrats are the party of the state, and they care about the state, and they're professionals about the state, and they want to do everything to preserve the state.